So the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans, or NCAPA for short, is a coalition of 35 national Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander organizations. Collectively, we provide a national voice for the AA and HPI community on public policy. The next slide. Our organization is structured into 5 committees: the Civil and Human Rights, Education, Health, Housing and Economic Justice, and Immigration. And for our Education Committee, it's co-chaired by CRAC and APALA. Next slide. And these are the organizations that are part of the NCAPA Education Committee. OCA Asian Pacific American Advocates is a national membership-driven organization dedicated to advancing the social, political, and economic well-being of Asian Pacific Americans. APALA, the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, is the first and only national organization of AAPI workers, most of whom are union members and are allies advancing worker, immigrant, and civil rights. CRAC, the Southeast Asian Resource Action Center, is a national organization that advances the interests of Cambodian, Laotian, and Vietnamese Americans by empowering communities through advocacy, leadership development, and capacity building to create a socially just and equitable society. The Asian Pacific Islander American Scholarship Fund is the nation's largest nonprofit provider of college scholarships for APIs. JCL, the Japanese American Citizens League, is the oldest and largest Asian American civil rights organization in the United States, and its mission is to secure and maintain civil rights of APIs and all others who are victimized by injustice and bigotry. And the Council of Native Hawaiian Advancement, CNHA, works to enhance the well-being of Hawaii through the cultural, economic, political, and community development of Native Hawaiians. So next, I'd like to introduce Matt Panuke, who is a Senior Policy Analyst at the National Education Association, who will provide us with an overview of ESSA. And as background, Matt is the first Executive Director of APALA and a founding member of NCAPA. So welcome, and thank you for joining.
Thank you. And I also had the opportunity to work on the Education Committee of NCAPA when it first started for many years. So thank you for this invitation. And what I'm going to try to do is the impossible, which is to do an overview of ESSA in 15 minutes, and including its history. But I've put more in the slides so you have it up there to look at later too. So basically, every student that sees that, the first question that comes up, what is that? And I think it's important to note that it's an amendment to the underlying education law, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And that was originally passed by Lyndon Johnson as part of the Great Society. And the idea was to bring money to struggling poor schools. And increasingly over the years, more and more strings have come attached to the money that goes out to the states. Some strings were attached during the Clinton administration, and then a very large set of strings were attached in 2002 when NCLB, No Child Left Behind, amended the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. NCLB was supposed to be reauthorized in 2007. It was very controversial, but there was never really the political consensus to reauthorize it. In 2009, Congress passed the stimulus program, which brought billions of dollars to education. And with the stimulus programs came a whole new set of strings for the money for programs like Race to the Top and the school improvement grants, including teacher evaluation, lifting caps on charters, firing half the teachers at certain schools or moving them out. So those were controversial. And there were 4 recent serious attempts at reauthorizing the law in 2007. 2014, and 2015, and it finally passed last year. I think one of the reasons that it passed was that by 2015, you were in a situation where not just struggling schools were in poor neighborhoods were being labeled failing, but sometimes 70 or 80% of the schools in a state were labeled failing, and that really caught the eye of policymakers. we can go to the next slide. So just basically, I don't want to rehash too much what was in No Child Left Behind, but it's important to know when looking at the new law. So, as you know, it focused heavily on reading and math scores. There were mandatory tests in grades, each of grades 3 to 8. Once in high school, there was an adequate yearly progress system under which all schools were supposed to be 100% proficient, and there were steps toward that 100% proficiency. And if any subgroup in a school did not meet the target on this march toward 100% proficiency, the school itself was labeled failing. And again, because 100% of schools were supposed to be proficient, gradually over time, increasingly high percentage of schools were labeled failing. It started to accelerate at the end, sort of like a balloon mortgage. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but basically the states said, well, we've got to be 100% proficient by 2014. So let's start out our goals, our interim goals, at kind of a low step. So the steps were low from like 20, the first 5 or 6 years. They all think this bill's going to be reauthorized and changed, and it doesn't, and so it's still around. So toward the end, the states everybody's achievement had to make huge jumps in order to, so I think it was like Vermont and Washington State did not get waivers from NCLB, and they were basically by now, they're at 100, they were at 100% of schools that weren't that were non-proficient. So what happened, let's just go back one. So real quickly, what happened under NCLB if you didn't meet these goals? After a few years, you had to provide tutoring. The tutoring system was not very good. You had to provide choice to go to another school. Often there wasn't another good school nearby, and it was taking money away from the school that needed help, and then school restructuring was also on the table. And all of this, again, led to a waiver program where a very large number of states basically dropped out of the NCLB and entered a new kind of set of strings. So we're now in a brand new era. It's going to be phased in over the next year, not really be 100% in place till 2017-2018 school year, but a lot of the decisions are going to be made right now. So if NCAPA members want to be engaged, the action is going to be now, because states are going to be considering what's our new accountability system going to look like now that we don't have No Child Left Behind, and what are our new school interventions going to look like? So the bill has within it many places where stakeholders are supposed to be at the table, and I know you're going to discuss that a little more later on, but certainly in the development of the state plan, you're supposed to be involved, and in the development of school interventions. So here's the new accountability system really quickly. You still have the reading and math test with transparent disaggregated reporting, so everybody can tell from the report cards how well a school is doing for all the subgroups. The states have to set long-term and interim achievements. So instead of the 100% proficiency by 2014, the state has to come up with its own goals. And this gets kind of complicated, so I'm glad it's color-coded here, but there are a whole range of things that have to be included in measuring schools now, not just the reading and math scores. You have to include the reading and math. You have to include graduation rate. Since graduation rate doesn't really make sense for elementary and middle schools, you have to have some other indicator for elementary and middle schools. You now have to measure English language proficiency in the main accountability system, which is new. And this is something that NEA, this is my only reference to NEA here, is since we pushed for this very hard, at least one indicator of school quality or student success which is it's a way of saying that rather than just measuring a school on the outputs, on the academic outputs, we're going to measure schools based on what kind of resources the school has. How big are the classrooms? Do you have Algebra 2? Do you have a school psychologist? Do you have a library? Do you have advanced technology? So now there's going to be many people pushing, and states have to decide whether or not to include these indicators. Participation also has to be included in the accountability system, and you're supposed to have a 95% participation rate, but the state decides what the weight of the participation rate is. So if we can go to the next slide. So you take all those indicators and you put them into a system and you decide who are your good schools, who are your bad schools. You create a tremendous, you use all those factors, whatever student support indicators, whatever academic indicators are decided, you assign them weight, and then you have to decide which are your good schools and which are your bad schools. And the bill has two different categories, schools needing comprehensive supports and improvements, and on the next slide, which we'll get to, schools with subgroups needing targeted support and improvements. So let me just go back to the schools needing comprehensive supports and improvements. These are schools that are performing in the bottom 5% based on all the indicators that we were just talking about, the academic indicators and any support indicators. So if you're in the bottom 5%, you're there. High schools that fail to graduate a third or more of their students, these schools had to be looked at under the waiver program too. And schools with consistently underperforming subgroups of students after a state-determined number of years. So one of the changes from NCLB is this group no longer goes through this lockstep choice and tutoring and restructuring. Instead, the school districts, I use this term LEA here, that means local educational agency, it actually means school district. The school district must, in partnership with stakeholders, and that includes parents, develop an improvement plan informed by all the indicators and looking at resources. So when you find a school that falls into this category, Congress has said they have to partner with parents in developing a plan to address this challenge. So this is an opportunity to promote new approaches too, like community schools, which are where you provide kind of wraparound services in a school. And then the other group of schools is called, on the next slide, schools with subgroups needing targeted support and improvements. So states have to come up with a definition of what a consistently underperforming subgroup is. So it might be they underperform by a certain amount, they underperform over a certain number of years, however, or they underperform relative to other groups by such and such amount. But they come up with a definition of a consistently underperforming subgroup, and then they tell the schools, through the school districts, you've got a consistently underperforming subgroup. And then the school must again get together with the stakeholders and come up with an improvement plan. So this is another opportunity for community engagement, because they're asking stakeholders, they're asking the schools, they're insisting that the schools work with stakeholders and in coming up with a plan for the improvement of the school. So that's the main change in the accountability system. I did want to say overall, though, that the accountability system is only one part of the Every Student Succeeds Act. It's in Title I of the bill. The bill's got 9 titles, I think. It has a title on ELL. It has an American Indian, an Alaska Native title. It has a title devoted to teacher preparation and retention and support. So it's and it also has a title that's going to provide a lot of money, Title IV, which is going to provide a lot of money for a range of school climate and school support issues. So I would just encourage NCAPA to keep an eye on the money that's going to be coming through under Title IV for community schools, for student supports as we go forward. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If there are technical questions you have later on, if you send them to Monica, I'm happy to help Monica or Rita, to get back on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. We really appreciate you coming and giving us the technical overview of ESSA and making sure that we understand the history and next steps. So now we would like to turn to start talking about what is the impact for the AAPI community and what should we be expecting next. So I'd like to turn over to Justin, who is a Civil Rights Fellow with OCA Asian Pacific American Advocates.
Thank you, Kelly. As many of you all are aware, data disaggregation is vital to addressing the inequities between the ethnic groups that fall under the Asian American and Pacific Islander category, or APIs. The API community includes over 48 distinct ethnic groups and over 300 languages. As you can see in this graphic here, Hmong, Lao, and Cambodian Americans have an average high school achievement rate of 63%, compared to 95% of Taiwanese Americans and 85% of the total U.S. population. And among NHPI ethnic groups, or Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander groups, only 3% of Marshallese, 12% of Samoan, 13% of Fijian, and 13% of Tongan Americans obtain a bachelor's degree, demonstrating the disparity between our ethnic groups. In 2014, the All Students Count Act was introduced, which would have amended the Elementary and Secondary Education Act to require information on the annual state report cards of student achievement at each proficiency level to be disaggregated by the same racial groups as the decennial census. This amendment, however, was not incorporated into ESEA as we had hoped, and the final compromise reached in ESSA was technical assistance. Under ESSA, state educational agencies are able to request for technical assistance from the U.S. Department of Education to disaggregate Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander data, using the same race response categories as the decennial census of the population, and to use such data to improve academic outcomes for such students. Recently, the U.S. Department of Education announced a new federal grant for states to improve their data collection and dissemination, which is also known as the D2 grant. The grant aims to obtain and evaluate disaggregated data on English learner API subpopulations beyond the existing 7 racial and ethnic categories within the school community in order to identify targeted strategies for closing educational and opportunity gaps. This new initiative is an important step towards supporting the language needs of our students and families, which are often overlooked due to a lack of school resources and specific data on our students. So under this grant, state education agencies can apply with a consortium of local education agencies for Absolute Priority 1 grant or Absolute Priority 2 grant. The purpose Priority 1 is to fund projects proposed by SEAs or state educational agencies that do not currently disaggregate API data on English language learner API subpopulations beyond the existing 7 racial and ethnic categories. The purpose of Priority 2 is to fund projects proposed by SEAs whose data systems, consistent with applicable privacy requirements, currently disaggregate API data on EL API subpopulations, and applicants must propose projects and initiatives that will analyze and evaluate this data to identify opportunity gaps, interventions, improvements to instructional programs, and other initiatives that will improve outcomes for underserved populations. I just wanted to note 2 important dates that are coming up soon. So the notice of intent to apply for SEAs in consortium with LEAs is next Tuesday, May 24th, 2016. And the final application deadline is July 5th, 2016.
Thank you so much, Justin, for that background. Now I want to switch over to Rita Pan-Ahrens, who is the Director of Education Policy at the Southeast Asia Resource Action Center, or CRAC.
Great, thank you. I want to start off with a profile of Asian American and Pacific Islander English learners. So looking at this slide, you can see what the top 10 API languages spoken amongst English learners are. And this is the most recent data from the Department of Education. And it shows that in terms of ELs, the most populous languages for our communities is Chinese, Vietnamese, Filipino, Hmong, and then you can see Bengali, Urdu, and other languages. This is important because there is a requirement in the new ESSA to identify the top English learner languages within each state. So having this broad overview of what the most populous languages are is important for our communities. So taking a look at the next slide that I've provided, you can see the top 10 states that have the highest number of API English learners. And I'm just going to list off the top 5 being California, where we have almost 12% of the EL population is API, Texas with 5%, New York at almost 21%, Minnesota with a whopping 33% of the EL population is API, and then Virginia at 19%. If we can go to the next slide. I'm just going to go over quickly some of the quick highlights of how English learner changes have been incorporated into the new ESSA. The first, I think, is really important. That is that there is now consistent identification and redesignation criteria for English language learners across districts within a state. In the old ESSA, it used to be that each district could determine how to identify an English learner and what the criteria would be to exit them out of English learner status. This now must be consistent within the state. And so that makes it a lot easier if a family moves from one district to another. The child would still retain their English learner status. All right, the second difference in the new ESSA is, of course, Matt mentioned that English language proficiency is now included in state accountability plans. And then the second piece is that it is now going to be more clearly disseminated in state report cards as well. I think before this reauthorization, it was very difficult to find those English language proficiency scores, especially at the district level. And because the identification and redesignation criteria is now consistent across the state, it's actually it will be a lot easier to see which districts within a state are actually serving English learners well. The third thing that is new, which I think I mentioned, is that states must now, within their state plan, identify the languages other than English that are present to a significant extent. So the term significant extent is not defined within the law currently. There are proposed regulations that attempt to provide some criteria for this, but it's still a very flexible term. This is actually an area where advocates can go forward and try to get their particular language to be identified as the top languages present within the state. And that's important for the next point, which is that states now have technical assistance available to them to develop math and language arts assessments in languages other than English. So if, for example, you wanted a Chinese math assessment, and by that we mean the state standardized assessment in Chinese, the state can then ask the Secretary of Education to provide assistance in developing that language. So this is another area where advocates can speak with the state education agency to try to get those assessments developed. And then the last thing I wanted to note is that there are proposed regulations for more inclusive parental notification, and that includes notifications on what the English learner assessments actually mean to your child, if they receive accommodations, whether that impacts their ability to graduate on time, what the accommodations are, and what the services they can receive. And I want to note for parents who are limited English proficient that the proposed regulations state that districts and schools must, to the extent practicable, provide written translations, which means it may not necessarily happen depending on the resources that the school has. But you should realize that an oral translation is always required by current law. It is your right to have an oral translator, whether in person or by telephonic services. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rita. And just a quick reminder for folks, if you have questions, feel free to chat them to us in the Q&A box on the GoToWebinar system. And now we want to switch over to Sivan Lee, who's a policy associate at CRAC.
Thanks, Kelly. So another important aspect of the new federal education law, ESSA, is that states must engage stakeholders in developing their state plans and other topics. And so there's a very long list of stakeholders, but I think key to our communities are parents and teachers, in addition to paraprofessionals, superintendents, and other education-related professionals. And so as part of this, we want to make, as part of this new law being implemented, we want to make sure that our communities are being engaged in a meaningful way, and to provide folks with ideas and ways so that they can engage. So where can you meaningfully engage? Some of these areas include the state plans that states have to submit to the U.S. Department of Education. Others are also on choosing local assessments. So as state officials choose what kind of tests students should take, they also need to do it in consultation with community members in each district, with stakeholders, excuse me. Another area of possible engagement is how districts can intervene at schools with underperforming students. They get to come up with ideas. So that could be anything from more tutoring, more additional staff, new software, and all of those things are being discussed as this law is being implemented. And I think for a lot of our work at CRAC and CAP and some of our other partner organizations, our work is really to help community members engage with the chief state school officers and other state and local officials. And so we'll have a link at the end of this webinar where you can sign up to be part of our ESSA API stakeholder list, where you will receive information about public sessions that are being held in different states where you can engage with folks. And just note that some states have already started this process. So like Colorado, Maryland, and a few others have already in like their second or third public engagement session.
Great, thank you so much, Sivan. Now I'd like to turn it over to Tamara, who is the Senior Liaison of Minority Community Organizing and Partnerships with the National Education Association. And one of her many other hats is that Monica also serves as the second vice president of APALA, which is a member of NCAPA. Switch over to you.
Great, thank you, Kelly. And so now that you have gotten a historical context of ESSA, and you've also heard about how ESSA impacts Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities, what can you do, right? So we have a number of take action items that we wanted to share with you. So the first thing that we would love for folks to contact us about is if you are in a school district or at a university or even in a state that does collect some kind of disaggregated data on Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders, please contact us. We're always looking for really good examples and models for folks who are disaggregating data for our communities. The second thing is join our ESSA API stakeholder list. Many of you have already joined, and that's why you're here on this webinar. But if you have not joined, please join by going to this link or have other people that you think would be really great to join as well. What we have been trying to do with this ESSA stakeholder list is we've actually tried to target states to make sure that we have at least one stakeholder for every state, so that, when we fought really hard to have a seat at the table, and so we want to make sure that when those tables are created that we can actually occupy those seats. So please sign up for our stakeholder list. The second thing that you can do around data disaggregation is contact your superintendent about applying to the data disaggregation grant program. The template letter is actually uploaded as a handout in this webinar, so you can actually download it and customize that letter so that you can send it to your own state superintendent. If you do contact them, please let us know so that we can follow up. We've been coordinating with members of Congress and other stakeholders to put pressure on our states to be able to do this. The worst thing that can happen with this grant program is that we created this opportunity, but we don't have states that actually apply for it, right? So we want to make sure that those states that Rita mentioned, who are the top states with English language learners, the top states with API students, recognize their students and apply for this grant. The next thing when it comes to English learners is advocate for your language to be one of the top languages for your state. So the way that you can do this is contact your state superintendent, right? The state superintendent actually will pick, they're not necessarily going to pick like, the top states that make sense, but they're going to pick the languages that people are demanding get included in that list. So make sure that you do that. And then what we're also doing is the Department of Education is hosting a series of listening sessions to talk to community members about ESSA and ESSA implementation. We think that's great, but we would actually love to have listening sessions that are catered to our communities, with our community leaders, with our policymakers, just because something that's being hosted at a Department of Education office is going to be really different than something that's going to be hosted at a Khmer temple, right? Or something that's going to be hosted at your direct service agency, where parents already go to get their materials translated, or already going to get support and help. And so please contact us if you would like to host an API community listening session on ESSA implementation. The great news is that we already have some scheduled in California, which we're really, really excited about. We can follow up with more information, but if you want to just write down the dates and the locations. So our first listening session is going to be in Sacramento, California on June 10th. The second one is going to be in Fresno, California on June 11th, and the third one is going to be in Long Beach, California on June 12th.
Thank you so much, Monica, and there's lots of great ways to get involved. A reminder, we're going to switch to our Q&A session, so if you have any questions about any of the issues that the panelists have presented on, please submit them on the GoTo webinar system in the Q&A box. We're going to take a couple of minutes to just go over the questions, and then we'll be right back online in 30 seconds.
Okay. Hi, so our first question is, who are these schools accountable to in this new approach? I have seen schools adjusted their grading systems as a means to meet the standards. Early this year, students at host site reported that their GPAs decreased, changing the overall scores of the school, meaning the students at the bottom will pass, but nothing has changed for the students.
The schools are accountable for meeting the requirements in the state plan. So the state plan is going to set up a new accountability system. And you're correct, one thing we saw under No Child Left Behind is that people were so fearful of their schools being labeled failing that they would sometimes game the system a little bit. And one sad thing that would happen would be that schools might focus on the students that had a chance of passing the test, but ignore students who had no chance of passing the test or students who were sure to pass the test. So we're hoping that with a less penalty-oriented accountability system, there'll be fewer incentives to have to try to do the kind of thing you described.
And just to add to Matt's answer, this is Rita from CIRAC. The state plan still has to be approved by the Secretary of Education, and so that should, there is still a peer review process to reduce the gaming of the system.
Okay, great, thank you. And then next question is for parent engagement efforts. Some of those efforts are taking place on the ground level because in many of these schools, parents are not able to participate. There's also a lot of arguments on the ground, and parents shifting blame for a failed education system. And this participant feels like this needs to be addressed critically. There have been parent engagement events, and only a few parents have shown up. Yeah, that we should probably tread lightly on the parent engagement topic.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to shift blame on parent and community members. I think that for a lot of us, we come from homes where parents don't know how to engage in our education system fully. And so what we're trying to do is instead of just relying on the Department of Education to come up with parent engagement activities that may not work for our communities, is to actually work with communities to come up with activities that will work for our communities. And so that's exactly why we're really excited to be able to work with you all to come up with activities that could work, right? So that's why dates that we've picked are going to be like evening time or on the weekends or around just non-traditional work schedules. And so we're hoping that, you know, some of these on-the-ground activities as well as these online activities can complement one another. And we're always looking for ways to do better. And so please contact us and let us know what we can do to do better when it comes to getting parents and community members involved.
And I want to add that our focus also is on enabling meaningful engagement of parents, especially for limited English proficient parents who typically feel excluded from this type of stakeholder engagement. And so that includes promoting policies for translated written notices, such as when information is shared with every family in the school, we believe there should be some opportunity for written translations. This includes having oral translations for meetings, such as your IEP meetings if you have a student with a disability, or if the school nurse is calling your home, you know, you should have access to an oral translation. And also looking at different modes of communication, whether that's home visits, whether that's doing visits at different times other than during the school day. So we're looking at a lot of different, you know, policies. And also, we want to note that at our listening sessions in California, we are going to have a focus group on the type of meaningful engagement that you want. So we want to hear feedback on what you think is really important to make this better.
Great. And then I think the last question we have here is on more details on the listening sessions. So I think like Monica shared, it'll be in Sacramento, Fresno, and Long Beach on June 10th, 11th, and 12th. And then I think in the next few days, we'll be sending more specific details on locations and an agenda.
Yeah. So immediately after this, we'll probably follow up with this presentation as well as a save the date flyer for those listening sessions.
And a registration link so that you can sign up to show your interest, and we can send you the details on the specific location.
And I think we should also note that what we're working on having at these listening sessions is, if needed, we will be trying to provide some childcare so that parents can come. And then also, we're also trying to be able to provide translators so that limited English proficient parents and community members can participate and just fully participate.
Yeah, and then actually there's one more question. There was some clarification needed for the information sessions. So if folks wanted to organize their own information session and invite us, we'd be happy to do that. But for this California community sessions, we have already planned this, and so we'll be sharing that information out.
Well, if there are no other questions, seeing none in the queue, we want to thank all of our panelists, especially thank you to Matt for coming down to speak with our folks on the ground. This webinar has been recorded, so we'll have the slides and the recording available for you to review again and to share with your partners and community members. And we hope to see you at our convenings in June in California. And if you're not in California, please reach out to us. We would love to connect with you and work with you to do convenings in your state. If you have any questions, we've thrown up our email addresses on the slide. If you'd like to reach us at Kelly@ncappaonline.org. You can reach Rita at crac.org and Monica Tamara is mtamarath@nea.org. If you connect with any of us, we can get answers to you and connect you to the right resources. So thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us on our webinar, and please stay in touch with us. Thank you.